Hi, this is Trisha Wolfrey from Your Empowered Self, and this is the How to Manage Your Stress podcast. Today, we're going to be looking at something that affects many of us, and it's to do with pain. Do you suffer from pain, and does it get worse when you're stressed? For many people, that's true, and today I'm going to be in conversation with Hannah Wilson, who's a physiotherapist specialising in pain. So we're going to be talking about that shortly. Before we do, I'm going to ask her what it is that stresses her out on a day-to-day basis.
Hello, Trisha. Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. What stresses me out, I probably could be regarded as a bit of a perfectionist, and it stresses me out when I can't do things the way that I would really like them to be done. And then I run out of time, and then that just makes everything worse. So when I am aware of the fact that I'm trying to do something that's quite unattainable, I do try to recognize it and take a few deep breaths, and things are often good enough.
Yeah, I love that thought about good enough, because most things they're all right if they're good enough, aren't they? I often say 80% good enough, or 80% is good enough, sorry, because usually that's true. It's only things like if you're doing brain surgery, that you've got to get 100% accurate, or if you're doing a heart transplant, that you've got to do 100% accurate. But if you're making a meal and, well, for me, I go for 60% good enough because my cooking is not so great. So it's just like, I did my best and it's just going to have to be okay for you. And that's okay. And actually doing that with a sense of humor, often humor helps. I love the fact that you do the deep breaths because that helps. And if it's something that you can learn from, what mistakes did I make? All right, I know, I'll do that next time. Then that's great. You've learned from your mistakes, which is actually the best way of learning. So perfectionism is just not a human condition, but so many people strive for it, don't they? So you're in good company, but not comfortable company, if you don't mind saying.
No.
Okay,
Yeah.
so today we're going to be talking about pain. And this is an area that you do specialize in, you've got a passion for. What has pain got to do with stress?
I think pain and stress kind of go hand in hand in a bit of a vicious circle. I feel that I work with people who experience musculoskeletal persistent pain. And I think that when people have an ongoing pain in their body, that's quite stressful. It becomes quite a stress. But I also think, and I suppose that it has a physical effect in that it can make people move a bit differently. People can feel quite tense within their bodies, and that creates abnormal movement patterns, and then that can maintain the persistent pain within their body. But on the flip side, I think nowadays most of us live in a stressful environment. We live in a stressful society. There's a lot of different pressures on us, and that has an effect. And you'll know this much more than I do, Trisha, but that obviously has an effect on our hormones, so our cortisol levels and our adrenaline levels, and then that can have an effect on our nervous system, which is already sensitized if we're in an ongoing painful having an ongoing painful experience, which then persists, and the brain then can recognize this sensitivity within the nervous system, and it becomes a bit overprotective and a bit over vigilant, and it maintains this this persistent pain that's going on in the body, and then that causes more stress, and it goes on and on and on. And then it's not just what's going on within the body, it's also what's going on emotionally. And then that can can affect how we think and how we feel, and then that also has an effect on our nervous system. So stress and persistent pain, or even a pain in an acute state, is they're different mechanisms, but it has a big effect.
When that's a massive vicious circle, I would call that. Would that be a good thing to call it?
That's what I call it. I call it a vicious circle. I'm not sure.
I would call it a massive vicious circle.
No, yeah, I suppose I'm yeah. No, it is. It's a huge circle, and it's a huge circle to try and help people with, because there's lots of components, and that is the nature of chronic pain, in that there is lots of different influencers and different dimensions to it, and that's why it's quite complicated.
Yeah. So you mentioned there, Hannah, chronic pain and acute pain. For the people watching and listening, can you explain what the difference is?
Yeah, and I think pain is very much dependent on context, and that's something that often is overlooked by all of us, really, because I think it's not always fully understood. But I think what I kind of try and make it as simple as possible, in that with acute pain, it's much more associated with an injury. It's much more associated with tissue damage. So there may have been a trauma, some kind of injury has been sustained within the tissues, and usually within acute pain, the pain is there as a protector. Well, pain is always a protector. But in acute pain, it's associated with inflammation, associated with the injury, the chemicals then that are released with inflammation, that they will settle as the healing happens within the body. So usually you would expect pain to settle within a few months, between 3 to 6 months, as the injury heals, dependent on what the injury. Obviously, if you bit the inside of your mouth, that's only going to take a few days, whereas if you've got a broken bone, that's going to take a bit longer. But persistent pain is more associated with the nervous system. It's more associated with the sensitivity within the nerves, as opposed to tissue or a physical influencer to pain. It's not to say that the physical body isn't part of persistent pain, but it's more the mechanisms, the drivers behind it are to do with sensitivity within the nervous system, and the brain becomes a bit hypervigilant to the sensitivities. It becomes quite hyper attentive, I suppose. And the body, the brain goes into it becomes almost too protective of the body, and then we kind of misread those feelings that we get, and it becomes an ongoing situation.
Vicious circle.
It's another vicious circle.
Yeah, no, a massive vicious circle. Yeah, so that's a really good explanation there. So so with the massive vicious circle, it's hard to know what comes first. Is it the emotion or the pain? Does the pain cause the emotion, or does the emotion cause the pain?
I think it's really I think it's really difficult, and I think by the time I get to meet people, it's really difficult to work it out. And almost in some respects, to me, it almost doesn't matter. We kind of talk about it all, and we work it out at all. When I meet people for the first time, I do an assessment, and that involves a physical examination, but as well as I think it's really important to get to know the person and get to know what they are feeling and understanding, and what their knowledge is about what they're experiencing. And then I'll put it all together, and we'll work out all the different influencers, and we'll try and work on them all, really.
Oh, that's really good. So you look at all of the factors that might be affecting them. Because it's similar with my work, actually. I don't work with, actually, do I work with pain? Yeah, like if people got headaches, it's often an emotional cause. You know, so looking at what is the thing that's going to make the biggest difference, and maybe it's a range of things. So when you work with people, what is the most common way that you would help somebody with their pain?
I think because I'm a physiotherapist, most people expect me to work on the physical health. So most people come to me because they expect me to help with their movement, how strong they are, how fit they are. So most people would expect me to help with their physical condition, and that's what my training is. That's what I spend my knowledge is. So I help people move better, move in the best way that they can possibly can, to get back to doing the things, the activities, the exercise, the movements that they would like to do. But along the way, often as we have conversations and get to know people, I get to know people better. I also then add in other things that may help them. I've done a bit of training in acceptance commitment therapy and mindfulness. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not pretending, I'm not a psychologist. I've not had formal psychology training. So if there's things that people need, what I would call proper help, then I would suggest they speak to somebody. But there are things that I can bring into my practice that helps people understand and just understand how they think about their condition and how they believe what's going on in their body has an effect on how they move and how they live, and how, because a lot of people are quite frightened of their pain.
Yes.
They think that if they move then they damage their body, that because our traditional way of understanding pain within our body is that there's a physical structural damage. And while there possibly has been at some point, bodies heal themselves. That's just a fact. That's what's happened. But sometimes the pain just doesn't settle the way that we would expect it. And often we then think that that means that whatever the injury was hasn't healed. And that isn't always the case. I go back to what I said earlier about this sensitivity and the hyperattentive, hypervigilant brain. So we talk about that. We discuss that. If people have had x-rays and scans, we talk about the findings, and we talk about this sort of the lack of correlation between often that's found on an x-ray and a scan to current symptoms. And I often use an analogy of no, I guess I go back to thinking about all the different things that influence pain, and lifestyle events, and are really important. How we sleep, how we eat, what we drink, and stress is a big thing. Often I find that people are under a lot of stress,
Yeah.
and we talk about that. And then I think it's also important to remember that it's not just what's going on within us, it's also what's going on externally to us as well. What environment we work in and how much that, or live in, and how much that can influence our
Yeah.
pain experience as well.
If you think about it, when somebody's stressed, they tend to kind of tighten up, don't they? So I guess that injury or aching of the body will be more common if they're stressed. Would that be? That's just me guessing, by the way. Would
I
that
think
be
it's
true?
yes, I think it could well be true, but I also think there's plenty of people who go around stressed that don't have physical sensations within the body. I think it's quite an interesting thing to consider, that why do some people who are stressed experience pain within the body, and why do some people who are stressed don't? I think that's what makes it all quite complicated, because people don't always follow the same sort of
Yeah.
pattern, I suppose.
We're so
Mm.
complex, aren't we?
Mm.
But what I
Mhm,
was
mhm,
thinking is
mhm.
that if you are so stressed that your body is very, very tight, and let's say you bash into something, because your body is rigid, that's much more likely to be a painful experience, because you're jarring against what it is. But if your body is relaxed, you're kind of not going to have the same kind of impact. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, it does. I think there possibly is something in that, but I think also what is more than how we are physically. I think if we're stressed, our underlying nervous system will be primed, will be already on an alert. It'll already be on an
Yeah.
overprotective thing. And then you've added something else into the mix. And
Yeah.
then based on perhaps past experiences and past memories of what that bash might have done to you previously, you add that into the mix, and the brain then remembers, oh, actually that was not a good thing to do, and actually I'm tired, I'm running late, I'm stressed, and now I've got a sore shoulder, and I think altogether that the brain then goes into a protective mode, and it
Yeah.
gives us more pain. I think
And
simplifying
doesn't
it
pain
perhaps.
also have something of a functional value? So for example, it helps you remember to be careful. So if you've hurt your knee and it hurts, it reminds you to be not to put too much pressure on it. Isn't that also a factor? No?
Well,
That
yeah,
rubbish?
no, it's not. I think the purpose of praying is that it is a protector. It's the body's alarm system to
Yeah,
protect us against something. But I think I go back to the fact that sometimes it can become overprotective. So
yeah,
actually, we think that we need to protect our knee. And I can use this personally because I have got a sore knee, and every time I bend, it hurts. But actually, I know that it's overly sensitive because I've had it for a little while. It's not settled down, and actually, I'm preempting it that it might hurt. So I'm already a bit kind of aware of the fact that it might hurt, and in that respect, that's not very helpful, because
Yeah.
actually it would be better for me if I just relaxed and got on with it and moved and let it do its thing, rather than me kind of holding back. And I think there's so much that goes on subconsciously in our brain to protect us, that actually we kind of end up holding ourselves back sometimes.
Yeah.
But that's only in a persistent state. Obviously, in an acute state, if you've fallen and tripped on your knee or twisted it playing football last week, then pain is really useful, because you do need to protect it. You do need to be kind to yourself and let it settle. In saying that, you should be kind to yourself all the time.
All the
Um,
time,
all
absolutely.
the time, doesn't matter. But no, when it's acute, that's different. You do want to be protective and hold it back and let it heal, but perhaps less so slightly when it's in a persistent state, because one of the reasons it's become persistent is perhaps it's been held back and just not allowed to settle the way that it wants to, really.
Yeah.
Um,
Any other tips that you have, Hannah, that might help somebody suffering from pain? And especially where it is stress related, or there's a
when I think
stress factor involved. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think what is really helpful is anything that will help keep ourselves safe. So calming down, tapping into the parasympathetic nervous system, calming our sensitive nervous system down is really useful. And I do talk about acceptance work. I do talk about mindfulness. I do talk about breath work. I do talk about relaxation, and often I've done that with some clients if they're interested. And I know that's probably more traditionally thought of as a stress way of managing stress, but as we've talked about earlier, they go hand in hand. And I do think that anything that will help calm down the nervous system is helpful. And I guess that's where exercise can come into it, and movement can come into it. And often if people are stressed as part of their picture, then I may suggest something a bit more restorative and relaxing. Yoga is very good, Tai Chi is very good, rather than something that's a bit more kind of upbeat and may actually have a stress response adding to what's already going on in the body.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Well, I hope everybody has found this really helpful. It's a very complex subject, because we spoke about it before, didn't we? So do make sure that you're taking good care of yourself. And I always ask my guests if there's a book that they've read that might be helpful to somebody else, maybe inspiring or helpful in some way. And you had one in mind, didn't you, Hannah?
I do actually, and I just finished a book called The Painful Truth, and it's written by he's a doctor called Monty Lyman, and he went on a bit of an exploration for himself to learn a bit more about pain, and it was such an interesting read, and it covered all sorts of different stories about other people that had experienced pain in different ways, and it links back to a lot of modern up-to-date science, and it gives lots of good references. And I think for anyone I believe that anyone who is experiencing pain of any sort, the best way for them to help overcome it is to understand it and learn as much as they can. And this is not a bad read. It's written in a nice narrative, easy to read way.
Yeah, because science
And I
and
thought it was lovely.
don't often go together, do they?
No, they don't. And that's one of the off-putting things, because I've read many of these pain research articles, and they are really long and they use such long words. And this book kind of makes it much more easy to read and quite enjoyable, actually.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, thank you so much. So again, thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this, do please like and share. And if you haven't subscribed already, do please do that as well. You'll get reminders of what's coming next. Anyway, that's Trisha Wolfrey. You take care now.